Hey everybody, welcome to another Critter Stack live stream. We get it sharing, and we'll just get things going. People can come in whenever they do. All right, so hopefully you're seeing a PowerPoint slide. Before we get started, folks, anytime, ask questions in the chat or argue with me if you want to, or if there's something I'm not covering you really wish I would, let me know. I'll try to get to it as I can. And let me see, pop up my notes. All right. So, hi, I'm Jeremy Miller, just in case you don't know. I'm the technical leader of both Wolverine and Marten, and a major contributor to a third project called Alba that's going to make a guest appearance today. I'm also the owner and founder of JasperFX Software. We provide consulting or formal support contracts or custom development around Critter Stack. So, Critter Stack tools are going to remain open core. They're going to remain open source, but just know there is a company behind it if you ever do want to have services behind it. Anyway, so what we're getting into today, I want to talk about integration testing with the Critter Stack. And this has been very timely lately. Just recently kind of felt like had a slew of questions or problems from both JasperFX clients and just folks from the community around testing with Wolverine and Marten when databases or asynchronous messaging was involved. It's a lot of the questions, the problems, and even the solutions overlapped. So I thought it was probably worthwhile to rush out and try to get a live stream in, try to get more content and more discussion going about this stuff. So there's two kind of big important things I want to talk about with this. Are two related trends. First off, we think testability is really important. Constantly see a lot of discussions about how do I architect my application so that it's extensible, it can accept change, it can be maintainable over time, I can fulfill new business requirements, that kind of thing. And of course, it always ends up being a conversation about solid principles or introducing clean architecture, the onion architecture, and all that jazz. I'm going to say instead, and what I would like to recommend to people building a new app from the beginning, focus really hard on your testing, your feedback cycles through testing. The more higher quality, more reliable, faster testing safety net you have, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to make any kind of change to your system, even if that means doing some kind of re-architecture. All that other stuff, it might be extra complexity. It might not pay off. It might, but the testability and the test harness will always pay off, or should. So the Critter Stack, we definitely care about testability. We care a lot about making your code, your business logic, and your workflow logic to the point where it can be isolated in nice, pretty little pure functions for easy unit testing. But today we're going to talk strictly about integration testing. We also care a great deal about trying to simplify application code. Again, just to pick on clean and onion architecture. We kind of want to throw out the value proposition. What if integration testing involving databases, even message brokers, other infrastructure, what if integration testing was simple and fast enough and reliable enough that you no longer cared or had to be quite so paranoid about separating layers just to be able to get mocks and stubs in for unit testing? So part of our value proposition is we can make things such that you can build a much simpler code base and still have testability. And then I want to point out, this is just going to come up over and over again. Marten and the Marten Postgres combination is also really helpful. One of the things Marten can do, if you're coming from an EF core background, one of the huge advantages of Marten in integration testing is Marten can just look at your database and say, you're missing these tables, this function, or this is different. I'm going to just quickly make the database be exactly how the application says it should be on the fly automatically for you in a development mode. So you can just go. You can stand up new Docker containers. Postgres is also really helpful because it's a much smaller Docker image than something like SQL Server, or the few of you out there that are still using something like Oracle. It's very easy to spin Postgres up, and Marten will just, and Wolverine too, will just set up your Postgres database for you so you can just get up and go. Okay. I promise there will be code soon. Just these are the tools. If you're here on purpose, you're probably already a little bit familiar with them. But the two main tools we're going to talk about today. Wolverine it's a lot of different things. It is an asynchronous messaging framework. It can be used as just an in-memory mediator and an in-memory message bus. And it also has an add-on to use the same command and middleware framework. In all cases, can also be used as an alternative HTTP endpoint framework within ASP.NET Core. If that sounds scary, let me just point out you can still use it with ASP.NET Core middleware. You can use it mix and match with MVC Core and minimal API and even fast endpoints in the same app. Should you do that? Maybe not, but you could. Marten is going to handle everything for persistence here. Mainly what we're probably going to talk about is using Marten as an event store today, because that's where most of the challenges for testing are going to come about. All right. Just to set some common verbiage, the words unit and integration testing are so overloaded that maybe not completely helpful. But if you think of your classic classic testing pyramid, or whatever shape you particularly call, we're going to look at the middle layer of that. When we say integration testing this time, we mean there will definitely be databases involved. There could be message brokers. There could be other external infrastructure. We are primarily going to be focused on using either message handlers or HTTP endpoints as our entry point for these tests. So that kind of middle layer of your testing pyramid is what we're going to focus on today. If you're wondering, we absolutely do feel like there is still a role and a place for tools like Playwright or Selenium or Cypress.io. I just want that place to be as far away from me as possible. Well, let's get on. Okay, so I'm going to start backing this up. Some things I want to say about what is going to help you succeed with integration testing. The first thing we always have to establish for known inputs in the system: what's the state of the system? What's in the database? What is the user input? From known inputs, we should have expected outcomes, either changes in the database, values returned from a service, whatever it's going to be. All successful testing has to start from that value proposition, no matter what. Now, the rest of it, let's get into some things that are a little more theory or a little more preference. I'm going to use the term with folks called self-contained tests. And all I mean right here is, as much as possible, I would like an integration test to set up the system state itself. So rather than always depending upon a shared data set that, well, the database is, the data has been restored to a copy of yesterday's production. Let's go run some tests on it. Instead, the test hopefully sets up if the existing system state is exactly this, or everything that's important for it is set up and ready to go. With the test harness, something that Marten and Wolverine can do to some degree. If you're using Docker-friendly tools, Postgres itself, of course, RabbitMQ is very Docker-friendly. Local stack with AWS has been pretty successful. Kafka, others. Wolverine and Marten could just seed that infrastructure for you on the fly. So it makes it really easy for the tools to set up your testing environment, especially if you're constantly destroying Docker images and popping them up. Should say Wolverine can also handle things like setting up Azure Service Bus, queues and topics and subscriptions. That's obviously a tiny bit harder. Let's just pretend it doesn't exist. Okay. The last bullet point here, practice like you play. So if you get anything from this live stream whatsoever, this is the one thing I want you to walk away from. This is an old saying I heard a lot from, I think, like a junior high basketball coach who was terrible in most ways. But what he really meant was anytime you're at practice, you should be playing, trying to do everything as if this is the real game. In testing, when we get to a test harness, what I mean here, and when I talk to other folks, is as much as possible, I want you to use the application's own bootstrapping to set up your test harness. So rather than having a fake IOC container, a totally parallel application bootstrapping for test harnesses, I want you to use the real application itself, maybe with a modicum of overrides. So let's immediately jump in. Let's start. Let's actually get to code. We're going to bring in another related code library here. The link is in the show notes. It's called Alba. The original naming scheme for all these critter stack tools, it was originally going to be little towns in Southwest Missouri. Alba is the only town it's the only library that's left, just kind of a Trivial Pursuit kind of thing. So it's been around before the critter stack. That's exactly right, Eric. So this is the only tool that's still actively developed from the original naming scheme. Let's get into code finally. So I'm going to use XUnit today for the samples. Nothing is really that different between XUnit and Unit. Maybe some things would be static, some things would not. And we're also keeping an eye on TUnit as something that we'll possibly use later. But let's get into the very basics. So Alba, let me see right here. Alba is it's a thin wrapper around web application builder from ASP.NET Core. And even though it is ASP.NET Core, it is also just a convenient way of bootstrapping an iHost in your real application with a few overrides. So I'm telling it, hey, I want to spin up a new host. There's some extra wrappers around it for my actual application. So if we look at what the real application is here. So your normal application, you can see there's some Marten set up. We're going to come back to that. It's setting up with Wolverine. Wolverine's opting into some middleware, just everything that it does. Okay. So why this is important. What I've seen unfortunately, very frequently and a couple times recently, when people have fake bootstrapping off the side where maybe they're just spinning up an IOC container and kind of recreating the bootstrapping logic, you can very frequently have false negatives or false positives in the tests. And a couple times recently, I've been helping users or clients troubleshoot, why aren't my testing work? Why isn't my testing not working? And it did trace back to you're not using your application configured the same way. It's a little bit fake. Okay. So a lot of our testing tools, I'm going to show later, they are completely built around the iHost. So we kind of assume already you're starting with an iHost. Do have one exception from a client where, and we don't know why yet, where their iHost setup bootstrapping takes way too long for comfort for testing. So as much as possible, they've tried to recreate the real application and just spinning up an IOC container. I would try not to do that unless you absolutely have to, but that's the exception case. Okay. One of the things Web Application Builder does for you that is very helpful is it allows you to make a handful of overrides in your system. So here we're going to configure some services. We could override a couple services, like something common is maybe your application has a dependency on an external web service that's not even up while you're running. That might be nice to just throw a stub in there. We're going to talk in a little bit about stubbing out security, but here there's a few things that are important we can do for the critter stack. Honestly, I think it's web application factory. If I'm using that interchangeably, I was wrong. So Alba's wrapping a web application factory. Okay. So a couple things. So in this one, if your Wolverine application happens to be using some kind of external message broker and that broker is not available for the tests, and when you're just zeroing in on one service, we can just turn off all the external transports. It doesn't change anything about how your application works, except if you were normally publishing a message to an external transport, the testing is just going to record what got called. So you'll be able to interrogate the messages that were sent out, but it doesn't do anything else. So it doesn't try to actually connect to any message brokers. So that can be really convenient, especially when you're talking about something cloud-based that's not even set up. So the code samples, I'm probably not being that organized, Christoph, but this code itself is in the Wolverine code base. If you want to look for the incident service within the Wolverine code base, that sample is what I'm working off. Let me show a few more things. All right, so I'm using a couple new overloads. So in our Marten application, this is something that was added just in the last couple days after seeing what a client was having trouble with. Normally, you're probably running Marten with either the daemon in Marten with the hot-cold load distribution. Meaning when in normal production usage, you're spawning up 5, 6, 10, who knows how many nodes running in your application and cluster. Marten is doing a little bit of work to try to distribute that load out. Instead of automatically starting up every projection or subscription, it kind of reaches out and checks, hey, does anybody have this yet? Do you have this? Do you have this? And it's not an instantaneous process. So in testing time, that's inconvenient. In testing time, you want quick feedback cycles. You want things to just be ready and go. So instead, purely for testing, we can now just say, hey, I want Marten daemon. You're running in solo. You don't ask if you can run anything. You just start everything yourself right off the bat. Same thing with Wolverine. Wolverine does some kind of managed load distribution of first, am I the leader? Can I be the leader? Oh, you're the leader. And then the leader is going to tell every other node what to do. That's also a little bit of an asynchronous process, as you can imagine. So instead, we can just short circuit all this and say, hey, no, just start up like you're in solo mode. This is going to allow your test harnesses to go faster. And when we get to some of the testing around asynchronous projection subscriptions, one of the things you might be doing is constantly turning off the daemon completely, wiping data out and turning it back on. That whole process in testing will go a lot better if we make the Marten daemon solo. That was something that came up this week. We learned. So this came in Marten 8.8 just this week. Any questions or thoughts about that before I move on? All right. Okay, so just reviewing what we already talked about, and I wanted to review no matter what. So again, try to use the actual application bootstrapping and just apply some selective overrides. We've seen trouble with folks trying to test, and the middleware application is different between the test harness and the real thing. Maybe there's totally different IOC configuration that'll get you. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong, or you're not seeing how the application is going to work. You can use some judicious overrides, like you just saw running Marten or Wolverine in solo mode. Maybe you want to latch external transports. Maybe you want to replace some kind of external dependency that's just really inconvenient in testing. That can all be good. In just a second, I'm going to show some Alba techniques to get around security. Hey, Ross. So I want to take a break and talk about some tricky problems, some things we want to worry about. The first, I'm going to let you read that while I take a drink and gather myself. Okay. So first thing, I told you a lot of our testing tools are built around an iHost. Depending on what your application's like, you could easily have trouble with how fast your application can bootstrap and how expensive it is to spin up an iHost. So we're also going to run into parallelization issues. I'll tell you that I usually kind of wimp out and run integration tests in strict sequential order. That's an obvious problem because you may be limiting your throughput in terms of parallelization. You also have a question about what is my Docker container lifecycle? Do you use Docker something? I prefer to use Docker Compose, but that's mostly habit, to be honest. Muscle memory, start up Docker Compose once and just go to work on the application. Other folks are happily using test containers where you spin up a container as you go. If you do that, you do need to watch containers aren't necessarily ready and available right after they're started. You may have to do something in your test harnesses just to wait. Is the Postgres database really ready? Is it addressable? I think test containers has some things built in for that, but you still got to watch it. I don't really have a lot to say about Aspire yet, other than I kind of resent that it's making us rebuild a lot of things that already work to work with Aspire. And I'm a little bitter about that, but Aspire is going to be a little bit harder for this kind of integration testing, and really going to have to owe the community a little more guidance on how to deal with that. Your parallelization. So a lot of the Wolverine testing tools for tracking activity that are really valuable can only be active one time for a given iHost. So some folks will try to parallelize tests by spinning up additional iHosts within the test harness. You might get some parallelization, but you're probably also going to suck down a lot more resources. You're going to have to try it in your own application, but you're just kind of your value judgment. If your iHost is too expensive, what I tend to do is to so this is an XUnit app fixture that's going to be shared between all integration tests. So you don't have to constantly rebootstrap your application and whatever else it's doing in it. On one hand, you lose the ability to be parallelized, but on the other hand, you don't have the expense of constantly setting up new iHosts or new databases. But maybe you would get away with using a handful of iHosts and maybe different app fixtures, kind of work on it. Data isolation. Anybody who's ever tested against a database kind of knows, hopefully everybody knows by now, it's really hurtful to try to test against a shared database. It helps tremendously if you can just have, this is the database that is only be using by this one running test harness, so I don't get false negatives or positives because something else is mucking with the database at the same time. I'm going to show how to use Marten to wipe a database between test runs. What I would say is on a case-by-case basis, you decide, do I need to wipe out the database before this test? Or like I'm testing against all new data my test is only going to care about this new data I'm putting in there. It just doesn't hurt at all for me to have some existing data in there. Just think about it. Okay, so some other things to worry about, we're going to try to deal with. When you're running a lot of asynchronous behavior, you got a chance that things will time out. So we're going to talk about a lot of the tools in Marten Wolverine have timeouts. Watch those. It's always kind of an annoying struggle of keeping your timeouts long enough that it actually catches the activity, but not too long that it's already failed and you don't even know. Visibility into failures. When you're running a lot of asynchronous behavior, it may be happening in background threads. The Wolverine track session, in one case, is trying really hard. It's going to tell you about any exceptions that happen during your test. We don't have that yet for Marten, and that's something I want to talk about. Okay. Didn't realize I didn't have this up. Okay, so first challenge, obviously, that's kind of annoying with doing any kind of integration testing is, you got security in your application, whether it's Open Connect or who knows what it is. All right, but for right now, I'm going to assume that all of your security is just web security. So Alba comes to the rescue here. Alba gives us a couple other options, but I'm going to show them to you. All right, one of the things I can do is when I'm bootstrapping my app, I'm just going to stub out all security. So this is your sledgehammer approach where I don't really care at all about whether I'm using the exact right credentials. I'm not necessarily testing authentication or authorization. I just want to quickly test the functionality of the app. So let's just pretend that every request is happily authenticated no matter what, which sometimes you might want to do. This is working with ASP.NET Security. It's injecting a new authentication provider that just sort of returns everything's okay. Hey folks, is anybody seeing code? Because you are definitely supposed to be seeing code. Hey Eric, can somebody write? Okay, hang on a second. Let's start sharing again. Okay, how about now? Okay. Folks, I'm sorry about that. So this is the set of code where we're setting up the Alba host. All right. In this particular case, Alba has kind of an add-on model of some policies that can apply to every HTTP request. So here, I've just taken a sledgehammer approach. I'm throwing in an authentication stub. Here, I'm going to get cocky and try to change the screen again. Now, folks, can you see a web screen? No, you don't. Okay. So what I've been claiming to folks is that, I'm just getting started with the live streaming. Hopefully bringing you valuable content, but definitely not bringing you any kind of production values. Eric, are we seeing the web screen now? All right, sweet. So this is the Alba documentation. It is in the show notes, so hopefully you can see that. I just want to show you some of the things that are possible with the stub. You do have some ability on a case-by-case basis. When you get into authorization and authentication rules, everything's going to work against the claims principle. You can stub and override, hey, you have this claim or you don't have this claim, so that when you do your testing with Alba, you'll be able to collect, the status code should have been 401 or 403 or whatever it's going to be. Just a lot knowing that's what there is. I don't want to get into it too much because I don't honestly remember how to do it very well. You can also stub out JWT security or specific schemes. I don't know why you would want to do that, but somebody wanted to. Or God forbid, if you're brave enough, you can actually teach Alba how to log into your real OpenID Connect provider. So you can do true integration testing. So you can test your application's behavior against your real OIDC provider. Just got to be brave to do that. Okay. All right. So now we're going to get into dealing with asynchronous behavior in Wolverine. Let's go to code. And my first test. So there are a lot of extension methods off the iHost. I'll give you a few. Just show you a few more of them. I can invoke a message handler directly, but what it's also going to do is it is going to track any behavior that gets. One second, folks. Okay, your code here. I have an iHost for the application. I can write a test where I invoke a message handler directly. I mean, forget all messages, just walk right up to it. It's the equivalent of calling iMessageBus.invoke async. But what's different here is this is going to put Wolverine into a mode where it tracks all behavior that's happening through. So any messages that are being spawned as part of create item command. Let's see what this thing does. So as part of handling this command, it is also spawning a cascading message. So this item created would be published as part of the test or part of calling this. So in our test, invoke message and wait. This is making Wolverine wait until all activity that has started has completed. So if we invoke a handler which publishes messages, and those messages are handled by publishing others and all the way down recursively, this wait is going to wait until it is completely done, and then it's going to come back to us. This tracked here, this is giving us a history of everything that happened while it was going on. So we can see what messages were executed. We can check which things might have moved to an error queue. Maybe something was published, but there were no handlers. Just a whole lot of stuff you can see about it. If taking for the example of if we called a message handler that itself succeeded, but it published a second message. And when that second public message was handled and it failed and threw an exception, Wolverine's tracked message behavior, it is smart enough. It is going to fail right here. It is going to throw an exception for you. It's going to list out all the exceptions that happen asynchronously. So instead of having to step through things with the debugger or check debug right line for test harnesses like XUnit that hide the console output for you, you're going to get some information about what happened in the background. So one of the things that is definitely very much hard about testing asynchronous behavior with automated testing is being able to understand why things failed if it's all happening in background threads. This track activity business is trying really hard to do that for you. Now, there's a few other options, just so you know. You can also send a message and wait. You can send directly, or you can do some things. There's a lot more power to it. I'm going to show you more examples. So this is something that we use very extensively throughout Wolverine itself to test a lot of Wolverine things. So a little bit fancier. We can also activate this with more power. There is a fluid interface. It's going to start called from track activity. That's going to give us a lot more options. We can override timeout. This kind of a timeout is pretty excessive, but sometimes it's necessary. If you have trouble with the application, maybe it's ending the wrong way. Maybe things are going out over RabbitMQ and coming back, who knows what. You can say as an additional waiter, no matter what happens, I want you to wait for this type of message to be received at, this particular iHost. Which, as you can probably also tell, this also gives you the ability to, if you can spin up multiple hosts in memory, and I'll show you some examples. I think, so I'm going to come back. It's something we use pretty hard. If you can spin up multiple applications as separate iHosts in the same testing harness, which plenty of folks do, you can actually test behavior that is messaging where messages are being sent from one host to the other, and the track activity is still smart enough to wait on both sides in this case. You might have to explicitly tell it, hey, I want you to opt into including external transports as well. Otherwise, it's going to say everything's done if a message hits RabbitMQ. But you can force it to also care about, hey, anything sent in RabbitMQ, you need to be able to have the receipt and successful publishing of this later. All right. So claiming that this is something, let's go back to where we were. So this is your most powerful tool in the whole Wolverine toolbox for testing asynchronous behavior. This is going to show up a lot in your tests. Anytime you need to care about executing a command or even handling a web request that may spawn Wolverine actions, that's going to trigger asynchronous behavior. And if you think about your typical testing structure of I arrange, then I have to act, and then I assert. If your act is asynchronous, you got to know reliably when is act really complete before I can accurately do my asserts. If you don't do that, that's when you're going to get flaky tests, when you're going to get a lot of blinking tests, and everybody's miserable, and we've all been there, right? Just to show this, make sure everybody knows it's here. Most people just kind of steal this a lot or adapt it. In the Wolverine test code, or probably half dozen blog posts of mine, you'll find a method called tracked HP call. And what this is doing is it's wrapping the Wolverine message tracking and making a web request. So we can tell Wolverine, okay, I want you to start message tracking, and our action here is we're going to call a web request end to end, and we're going to do all our normal Alba testing on the endpoint itself, but we're also going to wait until everything is completely done. Let me check this out. Let me find some sample usages. Okay. So I'm invoking Alba, but I'm also checking. This also lets me to check at the same time as a result of this web request. I can do some assertions on any external messages that came out afterward. So that's really valuable. All right. Yeah. So Eric just mentioned he's Eric's. So folks, Eric is one of our core team members on the Critter Stack as well. Hey, Eric. Thanks for being here. Something I guess to talk about, I'll mention at the end. Maybe it's worthwhile to finally have a formal testing support package that has a lot of these kind of things built into it. I don't know. Maybe. Okay. Another problem, and this is going to be a I'll show you what we have for now, but this will be something that's coming up more often. Needing to deal with asynchronous projection or subscriptions with Marten. So maybe you carry out an action that's appending events in Marten. That's great. But you're also running asynchronous projections or subscriptions off in space, and you need to wait until they're done. So just show you another helper. Let me go 1 second, folks. Find code I want. It's not really here. Sorry. My four-legged coworker just got mad because somebody's walking in the sidewalk by the house. So let's pretend that when we're logging an incident, which actually it does, if we were running some kind of asynchronous projection, and after we call this, we need to wait for it before we check things. Here on the Marten side, I'm going to push you to use fetch latest instead. So fetch latest will work no matter what your projection lifecycle is. That may be important. Now let's. So host is an iHost. So if you have the asynchronous daemon running in Marten and you want to wait until it's caught up, all the projection data is caught up, this is an extension method that's in there specifically for testing to be able to do this. So this is, it's going to see, it's going to know, hey, this is where the highest point of the event store is. I'm going to wait until all the projections catch up to it, and then I'm going to return, or I'm going to throw a timeout. So this is, again, trying, if you've got an asynchronous act, being able to successfully wait until the act is really complete before you carry out your assertions. This is going to have to be improved over time. It does not account for subscriptions yet. There's just a kind of a huge miss on my part. And it also doesn't do any, the way the Wolverine track activity will tell you, hey, you got a bunch of exceptions while this is happening. We know this is going to be a future improvement. Helping somebody the other day, I had to throw them into debug mode for them to be able to see, oh, my projection's blowing up. So we're going to either improve this or create another alternative that will helpfully tell you, hey, your projection, it hit poison events, serialization problems, whatever it was, so it can spit out, here's why your projections didn't complete. This is why you failed. Here's your diagnosis for it. On that note, something I forgot, sorry, I did forget to tell you guys. I think, let me see the, something I skipped. All right, let me go with the code. So one of the things I didn't talk about well enough was how do you manage data setup and resetting the database. So this is a pretty draconian way of saying before every integration test, I'm going to roll the database state back to an initial state. So reset all data here. This is something built into Marten. This is going to blow away all event and document data. And then if you have any registered initial data policies, it will apply those to build it back up. So what you would probably do is put any kind of reference data, like a list of states or countries or some kind of reference data that always has to be there. That would be in an initial data. Maybe that only exists in tests, but between tests, you actually tear down the whole database and rebuild it back to the beginning state. Then your actual test might put in any kind of preconditions. I like to always say, I tell people I prefer that you do this kind of cleanup before a test. So your tests, that idea of being self-contained, your test harness never assumes that the system is in a good state. It always puts it exactly the way it should be. So even if a bad test came before and screwed everything up, you're going to put it back to where it should be, so that you know you have legitimate results from this test. Also, I don't like to clean up the database state after a test, because I think it's frequently important to be able to interrogate your database and see, hey, this test failed. What's actually got stored in the database? Sometimes that can be helpful to troubleshoot a test. Now, something else that's kind of new. This is in the test example right now. I just updated some of the testing examples here and there, and I'll do more. We're going to use a different alternative. We're going to do something a little bit different, and this time we're going to go back to host. So this extension helper, it is so reset all Marten data async. And I realize this needs to get documented a little bit better. What this is going to do is, if you have any actively running asynchronous projections or subscriptions, it's going to stop it. Then it's going to reset the data, and then it's going to start everything up. So you could get funny results from testing, by trying to wipe out the data, but the daemon's still running, and it thinks it knows where the database is, but it's wrong. I think Marten would be able to recover from this, but that reset all Marten data async, this will make your test be more reliable. And I know this is one of the things we haven't probably publicized enough. So this is actually one of the reasons I wanted to do this live stream, to throw more of this information out there. Hopefully we'll get a much bigger tutorial or guide on integration testing. But until then, this live stream is what I'm probably going to send folks to. All right. So some of the things in the future, that is the best Back to the Future AI image I could create this morning. I don't know what that thing in the bottom is supposed to be. You talked about improving the Marten testing when it's testing asynchronous behavior. Try to give you more visibility into what's going on when there's errors, whether it's serialization errors, poison pill events, your projection through an exception. Try to give you a reason why your test didn't complete and it timed out, so that you don't have to run debug. It can just tell you, hey, bing, 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 here's your problems. So a good test harness, not only does it test your application, but hopefully it helps you unravel and explain why are things wrong. And that's kind of hard sometimes. So that's something that kind of came to my awareness this week. An occasional request, and this is a feature that mass transit has. In testing harnesses, this probably baked in a little bit as kind of a helper. We're going to set up, if you're using any kind of request reply in your Wolverine app, where your Wolverine app may be sending a Wolverine request reply to another application via RabbitMQ or AWS or Azure Service Bus and expecting a response back. In testing, you probably want to shut all the external transports off, or you frequently do. So you need to have a way where you can easily say, hey, if I send a request like this, this is the pre-canned response back. So kind of faking out and replacing inside your application, instead of making the RabbitMQ call, which won't work in your test because maybe the other guy on the other side isn't out, rigging it up so that request reply would give you pre-canned data. So you can test your behavior in your system before you even try to integrate it with whatever this third-party external system is. And I have no idea what the direction of this would be or what tools it would target, but I want to start talking to Eric and some of the other core team members about maybe we need to throw out some kind of critter stack test harness that spans maybe both Wolverine and Marten, that starts to build in more testing tools, things like the Alba, that tracked HP call. Tons of people copy and paste it, except they do modify it a little bit. maybe that's something that needs to be gathered up and formally put out there. So we're going to consider that. The answer might be just put up more documentation, more examples somewhere in public. I don't know yet. I haven't really thought too much about it. So on that note, hopefully you saw some of the right code at least some of the times. I'm just going to leave the floor open for a second. Is there anything else you all would like me to talk about that I didn't cover or was confusing? All right, folks. So if you think of anything else later, or if you're watching a replay of this later, just hit a comment and I'll check the comments, or definitely pop into the Critter Stack Discord server, and we'll see it there. Hey, everybody, thanks for coming in. And this will be available on YouTube in just a few minutes. Thank you all.